if there was really a Russia policy by the European Union. It is clear that the EU, and even now I guess, tends to, or let's say it's so, many member states, for example Germany, tend to listen to Russia first. But I think what has changed in the last couple of years has mainly to do with what happens inside Russia itself. I think the Union is now really surprised, if not shocked, by how serious Mr. Putin is about the reintegration of the post-Soviet space and how rudely he does that. I don't know if this kind of outside development, so to say, has already led to, I think, in a way, the association agreement and the willingness of the EU to sign it right now, and I guess there is this willingness, is kind of a result of this development in Russia. On the other hand, what I meant in my presentation, this whole geopolitical debate, I think it is in a way exaggerated. Nothing surprises me more in contemporary world politics than how much Russia is regarded as a world power. You know, we have to mention the case of Syria, but it really surprises me how professional Russian foreign policy makers can cover what is really going on inside Russia, how weak the country is in many ways. And this kind of geopolitical game Russia is very professionally driving right now, it is believed in Brussels, you know. So, and this is my kind of critique. I do not think that Europeans should even, under those conditions of an internal crisis, believe in a certain weakness, and that they do not, that they now have to be pushed to a new foreign policy approach, push back Russia in a way, and get engaged in this kind of the foreign minister speaking, former foreign minister speaking about a civilizational choice. I think this is exaggerated. And the last point on this is one really has to pose the question right now if the EU is strong enough internally to really change its Russian policy. Conditionality, does it work or not? I do not say that conditionality didn't work at all, but I only say that one cannot be very satisfied with it. You raised the question of is there a next step after the association agreement? I doubt it. Already the association agreement is very kind of far-fetched, very technical. I do not think there is really already the willingness to go for more than a kind of very technical economic step. The real political step is not in the making, and the EU doesn't think about enlargement at all at this time. And the economic interest is rather clear to me. Ukraine is a market of 50 million people. That is enough of an incentive to do something in economic terms with Ukraine.
Thank you very much. And the questions to Borys.
Thank you for the questions. I would like to refer to the question, of course, not to me, but I would like to answer this question whether the European Union is ready to provide the perspective of membership to Ukraine. So this is the key question. The European Union is short of giving the answer for 2 decades. Well, of course, you know that history doesn't know the subjective answer. But I dare to ask you a question. What might have happened should Ukraine be promised, after the victory of democracy in Ukraine in 2004, to which the students of Kyiv-Mohyla-Academy and professors contributed a lot? I would like to say that nobody can give you the answer. What might have happened should Ukraine be provided by the European Union the perspective of membership after the victory of democracy? Nobody questioned democracy in Ukraine. the new biggest country in Europe, became democratic. But the answer, was the answer by the European Union adequate? To my mind, no. It wasn't adequate. European Union continued to stick to its policy of no policy of so-called European neighborhood policy. So this was not the answer. European Union continued to put into same basket the countries of Northern Africa and Ukraine. So this is partly answer to your question. Whether Ukrainian authorities are ready for Plan B or not, well, for Ukrainian authorities, this is not the matter of values and principles that they would like in the signature of association agreement. For them, this is one of the instruments to prepare themselves for the internal fight for the power during the forthcoming presidential campaign. So they will use definitely the signature of this agreement in their favor before the presidential elections, and they will use it meticulously, believe me, trying to prove, to mislead the Ukrainian society. You see, we are that democratic that European Union agreed to sign the agreement. Should the European Union do it without Ukrainian authorities meeting the conditions, it will be the betrayal of values and principles on which European Union is being based. And it will be discredited even not only in the Ukrainian society, it will be discredited by their own people, people of the European Union. If the European Union will, close the eyes on non-implementation of conditions. It looks like the Ukrainian authorities also do not have Plan B, but I think that the merit for Ukrainian democracy and prosperity will be more if after the victory of democracy in Ukraine in 2015 presidential elections, the agreement will be signed. But of course, we are in favor of signing this agreement should the Ukrainian authorities meet the conditions. And how I evaluate the legislative work in connection with the European Union. So, being in the kitchen, I would evaluate rather skeptically this job done by the Ukrainian Parliament. So, should Ukrainian authorities have, the political will, they might have covered and prepared those legislative acts much earlier. But they didn't do it because this is not their essence, this is not their system of their values. So that's why I think that they will use this work in order to bargain with the European Union, trying to convince the European Union that the minimum which was done by Ukrainian authorities will be enough for signature of the agreement. So for them, the red line is whether to implement one of the conditions on the European Union, that is selective justice or politically motivated justice against the leaders of the opposition, and Yulia Tymoshenko name is first of all. And I think that the least President Yanukovych and the Ukrainian authorities would like to do and eager to make a concession, that is the release of Yulia Tymoshenko. Speaking about my personal assessment of the situation, I think that Ukrainian authorities will do this gesture without any commitments with regard to Yulia Tymoshenko political activity in future. They will release her for the treatment, most probably either on the eve of the Vilnius summit or just a couple of days before. This will inevitably give effect on the decision, on the political decision of the European Union. But there is an inertia in the European Union structures, and this inertia is pressing the time. The time is, well, probably, this month is the last possibility, window of opportunity for Ukrainian authorities to implement the conditions. So with regard to Yulia Tymoshenko, most probably, I think this is my assessment, they will do this gesture immediately before the Vilnius summit.
Thank you very much. Olexiy, HARAN wanted to make a short point.
As to the message from the EU on Ukrainian membership in the EU, right after the Orange Revolution in January 2004, there was a resolution of the European Parliament which clearly stated that Ukraine has perspective to become the EU member. However, I agree here with Borys TARASIUK that the message should be strong, it should be repeated not only by European Parliament but by Brussels officials from Brussels. So I think at that time, yes, this possibility was lost. It was necessary to send to Ukraine a very clear signal. However, I don't think that at this point, at this very point, we ought to talk about what would happen next with Ukrainian membership in the EU. We should be realistic and pragmatic, I believe. Now we need to sign the association agreement and fulfill the criteria for that. What would happen next? What is next? Next is ratification. Ratification process actually would provide an ample possibility for conditionality. And not only for the EU, but also for Russians as well. Because they try to undermine the ratification process through certain countries. And also, what is next? The next is implementation of the agreement. I agree with speakers that the association agreement would not change the mentality and the habits of Ukrainian ruling elite. Nevertheless, here we may rely on the strategy of small steps, because despite how we criticize the regime of Yanukovych, which is ugly regime, I'm not here talking for press, so I can use this even in academic community. It's ugly regime, but nevertheless there are some laws which provide changes. Law on NGOs, law on access to public information. So the regime doesn't want to fulfill it. But they are on the table, and they provide some possibilities for Ukrainian activists, for Ukrainian civil society, also to ask the European institution to react to violations, and so on and so forth. So as to the plan B, actually I believe that the Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Sikorski, was talking about the plan B. Several months ago, he said, well, maybe it could be postponed, the signing of the agreement. But basically what I think right now, it would be a bit dangerous to postpone the signing of agreement, especially to 2015. There are too many factors. We don't know what would happen. What would happen within the EU, what would be the situation in national arena, the role of Russia, maybe the EU and the US again would need Russian support in fighting terrorism somewhere. Again, what would happen with the whole huge tax? So I think we need to use this chance which is on the table right now, and also try to fulfill the criteria which put forward by the EU.
Thank you very much. We can now open the second round of questions and comments. Iryna, please.
So I have two questions. One to Mr. TARASIUK. You mentioned in plan B that the association agreement should be signed with a democratically elected president. So, but can we be sure that the next president will be democratically elected in the free and fair elections? If we look at the last parliamentary elections. So there are concerns in this sense that perhaps it's better to sign the association my second question is to HARAN. You mentioned in your presentation that the choice, the decision whether to integrate with the European Union in the form of association agreement or whatever, or with Russian integration projects, this decision is made in Ukraine. So my question is, who makes this decision beyond the figure of the president? So if we talk about elites, there are a lot of speculation about the interest of so-called oligarchs. So what is the role of business elites in this decision? And whether population and which channels could influence this decision too? Thanks.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you. I'm Iryna from Kyiv-Mohyla-Academy, Department of Sociology, and I would like to ask a question to all the speakers. Following the comment from Mr. HARAN, from Professor HARAN, about the concerns we don't know what will be in the next 2 years before the presidential elections. Mr. HAERTEL said that democratization efforts should be switched from the government to the younger generation, to civil society, to new structures, alternative institutions, so to say. And then Mr. TARASIUK said that, well, maybe the EU should not sign the agreement with the current government. My concern here is whether Ukraine won't face a threat, a danger to become another Armenia in the next 2 years. So how would you react on that, and what would you expect if this plan B would be in favor, and how to cope with this challenge of not becoming another Armenia in the next 2 years until the new presidential elections will take place in Ukraine? Thank you.
Thank you. Another question?
From Hamburg, law student at Bucerius Law School and participant of the summer school here at Keynote. And I have a question directed primarily to Andrei HAERTEL, because I was here 2 years ago and we had a visit from the Mohyla-Academy to the EU Commission, the office here in Kyiv. And we had an interesting talk with the people there, and they said, for us as Europeans, it's inevitable that we have some preconditions before the signing of the so-called DCFTA, because we as Europeans understand ourselves as a value community, and they drew basically the line between the European Union and other global powers, like, for example, Russia, by this definition, that we have certain values like the rule of law, like the equality of everyone before the law, that would be very important. To what extent do you think is it dangerous if now the European Union signs an agreement with Ukraine without these preconditions included, to the position of the European Union as a unique power based on values?
Thank you. Okay, questions to all speakers. We'll start from the left. So, HARAN, maybe you can start. You have questions from EURONEST, and then we can exchange questions to all panelists.
Okay, from the left, not from political point of view. Well, I was talking, my point was that the decisions about the geopolitics, about the future of Ukraine, and about its foreign policy are finally made within Ukraine. Okay? So again, this was the case with Kuchma. This was the case, actually, the case in 2004. The decision to move forward with the so-called repeat run of this character. This was the case in 2007, this was the case in 2010 presidential elections, and this is the case of now, of choosing between association agreement and Eurasian Eurasian Union. Who is making this? First of all, it's made, its influence, the decision is influenced by a constellation of forces in Ukraine. This constellation of forces include a broad spectrum of forces. They include civil society, they include the public opinion, definitely the opposition, definitely. They include business, especially large business. Technically, and I mean, the final decision is made now in the head of our president, where you have interplay of different factors, rational, irrational, but taking into account all this constellation of forces, and also definitely the interest of the oligarchs. Again, it's very difficult. There is a long-standing debate who is influencing the Yanukovych as to his decisions. So we know some people, maybe we do not know details, but the final responsibility lies on Yanukovych. As to Ukrainian population and channels of influence, definitely it's important to explain to the population what is European integration, what would be the benefit. Because when you hear from main Ukrainian TV channels, crisis in Europe, crisis in Eurozone, crisis. So what would be the reaction? So I think we need to send positive information about what's happening in the EU, about the potential advantages for Ukraine. Definitely a lot would depend on how Ukrainian economy would react to signing of free trade agreement, what would happen with Ukrainian industries, and for Ukrainian population also is one of the important, very visible signals would be liberalization and then cancelling of visas for short travels to the EU. This would be very, sizable, measurable effect. We could always say, okay, now we have this freedom. So this would be a very strong argument. As to different scenarios regarding 2015 campaign and what would happen next, so as I said, I don't know, I'm not sure if association agreement would be signed. Now the chances for that increased. Putin contributed to this, but it's not 100% definite. Second point, then there would be ratification process. And on this long and winding road, there would be a lot of obstacles. And we are not sure that Yanukovych would follow this road. It could be again part of the game. There could be, there is a minion example, there could be, continuation of balancing, sudden changes. But nevertheless, I think, again, it's better to sign than not to sign because at least there would be some additional pressure on Yanukovych. I would also add to the perspectives of 2015 campaign that it seems that in case of signing association agreement, there would be repositioning of Yanukovych. So Yanukovych would try to seize at least part of traditional orange electorate saying, or post-orange saying, okay, I've done it. I'm recognizing you. I'm legitimate. He can do that in case of successful signing of agreement. At the same time, now there's a lot of talk about the threat to Yanukovych from so-called pro-Russian candidate, potential another pro-Russian candidate. Actually, I don't think that it would be a kind of additional tool for Russia to press on Yanukovych. But I think the pro-Russian electorate in east and south of the country would not, in the final analysis, would not be lost for Yanukovych. Because if this pro-Russian candidate would not have chances to go into the second round, inevitably, this electorate would support Yanukovych in the runoff. And in addition to that, Yanukovych could try to seize some part of European-oriented electorate. So I think this is, at least this is one of the scenarios for the planners of Yanukovych campaign in 2015. Maybe I
Thank you very much.
I have two specific questions posed to me and one question to all of us. Whether we can be assured that in 2015 presidential elections the democracy will prevail. Well, nobody can give you the guarantee. So the least I can give you the guarantee. But I'm trying to analyze the societal development in Ukraine using the assured facts, not just using the wishful thinking. We had in the last, so to say, 10 years, the tendency, according to which in each parliamentary or presidential elections, democratic forces prevailed. So if you even use the recent parliamentary elections last year, you may find that on a proportional part of the elections, Democrats gained victory. So, and because of the tricks by the authorities, we lost the general parliamentary elections. So the presidential elections are going to be absolutely different. So, and the tendencies I am referring to will prevail. So the tendency says and proves that in Ukraine there is definitely a majority of the society are supporting Democrats. Full stop. Be it presidential elections 2004, parliamentary elections 2006, parliamentary 2007, even the presidential elections of 2010. But this is a different story. And the proportional part of the parliamentary elections of last year. So this is a tendency. The majority are supporting Democrats. So if the Democrats will not make a mistake before and during the presidential campaign, the sociology proves that Democrats destined to win, to beat Yanukovych. So this is the sociology. This is not my visual thinking. So that's why I think that there are all conditions for a Democrat to win the presidential election. Whether the European Union will pay adequate attention to this forthcoming presidential elections, my answer is yes. Because of the geopolitical motivation, because of the political and economic interests of the European Union as well as OSCE or DIR office, Council of Europe will pay very attentive attention to, very serious attention to this forthcoming presidential elections. Of course, we, Ukrainian citizens, the whole society, should be interested in having these elections democratic and not to allow any falsification of elections like it used to be the case in 2004 presidential campaign. As to what may happen with Ukraine for these 2 years, whether Ukraine will repeat the example of Armenia. So these are, as people in Odessa used to say, why? Because you have to pay attention to security factor for the Armenian authorities. So it is not the case with Ukraine. And security factor is that more and more, with more oil and gas money coming to Azerbaijan is becoming stronger and stronger militarily. And Armenia is looking for an ally to balance this possible threat to Armenia because of Nagorno-Karabakh. So Armenia, after probably calculating all the consequences, decided not to infuriate Russia, to join the Customs Union, and to save itself from the security standpoint. And I would like to share with you my observation as to Armenia and the European People's Party. The EPP made a mistake in accepting in its ranks three political parties from Armenia. And one of them was the party led by President Sargsyan, who took an absolutely opposite decision to that of the policy of the European People's Party. So this was, I warned the EPP leadership at that time when they were making the decision. So, and I happened to be absolutely right in warning them because Armenia took a decision contrary to the policy of the European Union and the European People's Party. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very briefly, I'd like to talk about Armenia too, because in this case it shows two obvious things to me. That first, there is as much wishful thinking on the side of the EU if it comes to the eastern neighborhood as on the side of any partner, for example, Ukraine. And second, it shows also that this Eastern Partnership concept is to a certain degree as a foreign policy concept very flawed. Of course, I do not think that Ukraine will go the same way as Armenia, because Armenia has completely different strategic interests. It has historically no real problems with Russia. Russia's economic interests or what it possesses in Armenia is far more considerable than in Ukraine. It was just wishful thinking by European authorities that they could kind of pull Armenia in to this concept. So the Caucasus is another category. You cannot just, and I agree with the former foreign minister's kind of argument that you cannot subsum all those different countries and regions into one foreign policy project. This is clearly evident here. On the other hand, it also shows that the Union should be more careful than it is right now, because I guess even notwithstanding all this talk we have here, because we are representing only part of the, or you are presenting only a very small part of the Ukrainian society, and a very pro-European part. But I guess as far as the elites are concerned, also the European Union should have no doubts about what's going on here. Foreign policy is not about really integrating anywhere in the public with it. It is still about independence. And I'm very sure that even after signing the association agreement, Kiev and the authorities here will find some way or the other, and they should, by the way, from a foreign policy perspective, how to cooperate with Russia and how to cooperate with the customs union. We see that already with this participatory status and this observer status, and who knows what will arrive after the signature. So I warn this visual thinking, it leads us nowhere. Second, your question, is it dangerous to sign for the EU now to sign without any preconditions? I think now it's time to, when we speak about this association agreement, formally it was an enhanced agreement over years, you know. So, and it's not a kind of membership, it's not, of course it sends a clear political signal, but it doesn't give a membership perspective yet, and out of my perspective, it is also something we owe Ukrainian society and the democratic political establishment here in the country for the lots of efforts they have made. And I strongly do not believe that the association agreement will help Mr. Yanukovych politically. One has to kind of consider the gains here and the gains for Ukrainian society and for its long-term development in the association
association agreement are far bigger than the gains for Mr. Yanukovych. So we should sign the association agreement right now from the European perspective, but we need this last clear political signal, the releasement of Yulia Tymoshenko before the second peace, because otherwise Brussels will lose face totally. And if it comes to a longer-term perspective, as far as this value question is concerned, how do Europeans drive their foreign policy, also as a civil power to secure values in its neighborhoods or anywhere else? I think it is clear that you need a double-track diplomacy. You have to relate to governments as well as to current governments as well as to civil societies. But what you should do is you should do both things credible at the same time. So you should now sign the association agreement with the government, but you should also, as I said in my presentation, do something clearly for civil society. For example, establish a visa-free zone as soon as possible to send a signal to the society at the same time. We cannot just wait. This is politically non-defensible. We cannot just wait for a democratic president to be elected here in order to have the association. This is not a defensible or justified policy.
Thank you very much. Do you have more questions? In that case, maybe I have to raise questions from Borys and then Ramon. We have discussed here whether they would have any leverage to prevent a authoritarian outcome of presidential elections after the agreement is signed. In this context, I would like to ask you, there is a debate now about the scope of the provisional agreement, which we know will come into force right after ratification of the European Parliament, without ratification of the member states. And we have heard that there are ideas to include political conditions into this provisional agreement. So maybe you could update us a little bit on that, because that perhaps could give some leverage to the European Union beyond free trade area and sectoral cooperation.
I'm not responsible for the position of the government, but as far as I'm aware, the agreement, on the association agreement, immediately after its signature, and it requires political decision by the European Union, will initiate the deep and comprehensive free trade area between Ukraine and the European Union. So it will begin working even without ratification by European Parliament and the parliaments of member states. So this is very important. This is very important. Perhaps for the Ukrainian authorities, this is the most effective part of the signature of this agreement as early as possible. If the conditions will be right, if the European Union will feel it possible to sign the agreement, if the conditions are being met, so I think that this will be very important for Ukraine and the European Union that free trade area will begin working immediately.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the University of Birmingham. I've got a question which really sort of brings very stimulating presentations together. In your presentation, Mr. Humphrey mentioned democracy and human rights in one go. When it comes, for example, to issues like minority protection, there may be a difference between what democracy, democratic outcome would suggest, and, for example, what are external requirements when it comes to visa liberalization in Ukraine, especially in terms of sexual minority protection. It's a big requirement for the EU to have it. Yet, the public opinion in Ukraine opposes, with exactly the same issue in Moldova, and the same scenario using the Orthodox Church is being played out in Ukraine. To what extent the Ukrainian Parliament is opposed to protecting, providing this legal protection to sexual minorities in Ukraine, whereas the EU demands it. How do we reconcile? And it is a really major stumbling block on the way towards visa liberalization insofar as relations with the EU is concerned.
Yes.
Academy. I have a short comment on Mr. TARASIUK's position on Ukraine's part of Ukraine's position perspective on signing or not signing agreement. You have clearly stated that is your personal feeling that association agreement should be signed provided that the authority is fulfilling, sticking to the commitments. But it seems to me that it's some sort of a dangerous political pose, because as an academic and from my perspective, signing an agreement will anchoring Ukraine closer to Europe. And the theory says that if the linkage is stronger, there are more chances for the democratization. So these political games that Ukraine's opposition have with authority and between themselves may be too dangerous for Ukraine. And this is my feeling is that it's the task of Ukraine's opposition to get some sort of common ground and press the Ukrainian authority for fulfilling these requirements after the agreement is signed.
I'm not so much an expert on. I should be more of an expert in those minority questions, because I know that my organization, the Council of Europe, really insists upon those kind of protective laws. But for me, this kind of misfit, if it comes to that kind of legislation. It still shows to me that there are still considerable differences between us. And I don't think that we should, at this point already, it clearly shows that there cannot be something like a talk about membership. This has to be a very open procedure with what happens with those countries here. But I cannot really, to be honest, I'm not really sure if conditionality here really works. The Council has very different, if it comes to the minority question, it has a very different, it's more about capacity building, it's more about cooperation and dialogue on these issues. Because I think that as far as sexual minorities are concerned, those are very deeply ingrained kind of cultural questions. You cannot solve them with a kind of tough conditionality approach. Right? You have to engage in considerable dialogue, and this can last for a very long time. Right? So I think here the kind of coordinated approach of the Council is far better fit than what the EU does. You know? But that's the only thing I can say about it.
This is a very delicate question, Katerina, you raised. The so-called non-discrimination part of European integration legislation. If it comes to a personal attitude, I am ready to vote for this law immediately. I'm not in the majority with this position, but I'm of the opinion that if you weigh pros and cons of taking this decision, definitely pros is prevailing, because it concerns hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Ukrainians wishing to travel freely to the countries of the European Union. Of course, we have to take care about the traditions, the religious tradition in our country, the Orthodox believers, so this is the case. But we cannot use this as an argument, especially from one part of Orthodoxy being led by Moscow. So this is about a delicate part of this problem. So, and I wonder, and may I put the question to you, what is more important for Ukraine? the reform of procurator's office in Ukraine, the reform of judiciary in Ukraine, the code of elections in Ukraine, or the so-called discrimination law. So to my mind, of a much more systemic approach, of a much more systemic solution are obviously the problems which are, will define the future law enforcement in Ukraine for decades. The reform of procurator's office, the reform of judiciary, the reform of election legislation over this problem, which to my mind are not the problem of Ukrainian society. Speaking about the correlation of forces in Ukrainian parliament, I may say that the majority, the party of regions, outright refused to press on putting to the vote this law, because they are definitely not going to collect the majority. The communists will not vote. So, and it is a very shaky probability of passing this law in the Ukrainian parliament. So that's why the authorities used again the trick. They decided not to assume the responsibility, the political responsibility upon themselves in passing this law, but rather decided and entrusted the Ukrainian ombudswoman to ask with the Constitutional Court whether the Ukrainian Constitution provides enough guarantees for all minorities, including sexual minorities, or not. And this will be done by the hands of ombudswoman rather than by the authorities themselves. So this is the attempt to avoid political responsibility for very unpopular decision to be made. Well, whether association agreement will be the instrument of influencing in a positive way Ukrainian authorities, I doubt. So if you look at the history of these authorities, you will find definitely that since November 2010, when the first critical resolution of the European Parliament was passed criticizing Ukrainian authorities, nothing has changed. The authorities haven't changed themselves. So that means that with the signature of the association agreement, or without the signature, these authorities will not be changed. So this is my assessment. If we speak about the future of, let us assume the agreement is being signed, the conditions are being met. So my question is the same as Olexiy HARAN. What will happen in the process of ratification? Let me remind you that the current agreement in force between Ukraine and the European Union took 4 years to ratify this agreement, since 94 till 98. So how many years will pass after this agreement will be ratified, provided that Ukrainian authorities are not going to change themselves? We can only guess. So that's why I don't believe Ukrainian authorities can be changed with the very fact of signature of this agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Olexiy, what does this have to do with it?
This is our final word?
No. We don't see the time. Not yet. No. Okay. So do you have more questions now? It seems we still have some time left, but given that we... It's not a copy, but it says okay. Okay, then. Sorry, right. It's available. Okay, right. Okay, so then we had a very interesting discussion now. Perhaps some of the speakers want to add some final word or not. Then I will just raise a very short question to...
Just very, very briefly. So as was the prospect of elections 2015 Yes, sociologically shows that Yanukovych doesn't have chance, but the reality would be different. And I believe that our opposition is to take into account the result of recent local elections where opposition lost in the places not far from Kyiv, actually in Kyiv Oblast, in Vasilkiv, in Apuhi, where opposition had the chances to win and opposition lost. So it's not for sure. I believe it's very important for opposition to prepare well, not only opposition, but also for civil society, to prepare well for the elections.
Okay, thank you very much. We don't have much time left, so I think we'll wrap up here. We'll have another keynote panel tomorrow in the morning, apart from the roundtable today, and then we'll have a lot of interesting sessions on more specific topics and aspects of the topic of the conference. Okay, Andreas Umland would like to say something?
Before we leave for the first coffee break, I just wanted to point out something that I forgot to say at the beginning. The conference is also integrated in a summer school here, also supported by the German Academic Exchange Service. There are 20 mostly German, not only German, but mostly German students here who are in the audience. I would both encourage the summer school students and also the students from Kyiv-Mohyla-Academy or from other universities here to interact and talk to each other. One of the purposes of integrating the summer school into the conference was to further the interaction of our visitors from mainly German, but also from